Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. And please mute yourself if you aren't muted, because we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube shortly. And so it is my great honor to introduce my friends, Lisa and Connor Williams. And I had the chance to meet Connor and see him in action when we joined People United, People of Faith United for Justice, and we went to Madison with our legislators. And it was most fascinating to watch this very diplomatic man close the meeting. And so I want to tell you just briefly a little bit about them. So while we are celebrating a hard-won victory in Georgia, within hours we felt sad and frightened by an attempted coup. And yet we remain determined to dismantle white supremacy and to protect our democracy. I want to share the words quickly of Gabby Gifford. We will move forward together as I did and still do every day, one foot after another. When one person flags, another person steps in to lift up the weak and give strength to the doubtful. And so we are here today to talk about our democracy in action, and our love and our welcoming people back into community. As Reverend Jennifer said, we will respond with courage and resilience. We will continue to dismantle white supremacy. We will continue to strengthen our democracy, to continue the work of love in the world. We are steady, we are grounded, and we are strong. And you're going to meet two strong people. Our presenters are responding to what is needed in the community. They advocate with compassion while flexing their citizen muscles. And I have really enjoyed working with them. Lisa also works with TOSA Strong, supporting diversity, equity, and justice. And so after Trump's inauguration and watching the Women's March, joining the Women's March, she emailed her friends to create Persisters. And they had been meeting weekly in their home until the pandemic, but now they meet on Friday on Zoom. And hopefully we'll get a link so that those of us who also want to persist can join her. And Connor is an economic policy analyst. His mission is to lift people out of poverty. He supports individuals returning to our community from periods of incarceration. And in his work, he's addressing the root cause of poverty. He's also working on restorative practices, but I don't want to take their speech and presentation away. They are very gifted in sharing their knowledge. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Lisa will be going first.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you so much, Pat. I'm very moved by what you said, and I love the subtitle you put for my talk. You wrote "Persisters Flex Their Citizen Muscles," and I think that should be our subtitle. I just love that. We are trying to do that. We are trying, and that's the best any of us can do, I guess. And I really appreciate the quote you just shared from Gabby Giffords. When one person flags, another will continue. The fact that we have been on the calendar to speak this week for a long time, but we didn't know what the preceding days would look like. And I, for one, have flagged. I have fallen short of what I would like to be as my better self. And thank God I have the Persisters, because they've lifted me up and continued when I have I've had a hard time. I've been lashing out a bit in a way that isn't my best self. And thank goodness I have this group that holds me up. So that really meant a lot to me, because I have flagged, but I will do my best to speak today, even after what really challenged me this week. And I know all of us. So yes, I started Persisters 4 years ago. Of course, I didn't start it as Persisters. I was very alarmed, as many of us were, after the inauguration of Donald Trump. I just felt like I couldn't yell at my TV alone. I had to reach out to community. So I reached out to people and I said, I don't know what we're going to do, but will you come to my house and we will sit together and we'll figure out what we want to do to raise our voices, because we're citizens in a democracy. And that is both our profound, uh, profound rights come from that, but also profound responsibilities. And I felt anew those profound responsibilities, that if we wanted our democracy to be true to its words, then we needed to fight for that. So I invited a few people to my house, and that's where it started, just around the dining room table 4 years ago. And we took hope and direction that February of 2017 from the words of Mitch McConnell, of all people, who said to Elizabeth Warren, she was warned, she was told, and nevertheless, she persisted. And so we decided to call ourselves the Persisters. And I'm grateful we did, because it has been our call to continue the work no matter what. We persist every week, whether we want to or not, whether it seems impossible to move forward or not. I think that's been one of our driving forces, is persistence. And yes, the fact that we met at my dining room table for 3.5 years helped, because everybody knew that they could just come here. They didn't have to be, the doors open. We would have coffee and we would be together for an hour, hour and a half. I think that has enabled us to grow. It's such a simple thing, right? To be persistent, but it's very, very hard at the same time. So we are citizens in this democracy. We have these rights and responsibilities, and we think that these past years have shown how crucial it is to act as participants in our democracy. We engage with our elected representatives by raising our voice. We mostly do that through 3 methods. We write letters, and we've sent more than 6,000 letters to our elected representatives. We make phone calls. We never even kept a tally of that. It's been many more than the letters. And we write emails. So when you say we flex our muscle, I guess that's the most tangible way that we have flexed our muscle, is by communicating with our elected representatives. We started because we were so dismayed by the inauguration of Donald Trump, but we have expanded to not just look at issues at the national level, but also look at issues at the state and local level. Connor's been really helpful to us to raise issues at the state level around criminal justice reform. We do a lot of work on that. At the local level, I happen to live in Wauwatosa, so you all know what's been happening in Wauwatosa, and racial justice has become, well, it was always present in our actions, but it's become a very local, significant local issue. So we engage with our elected representatives at the local, the state, and the national level through letter writing, phone calls, emails. We're open to everybody. That's who we are. All are welcome. It's called Persisters, but there are many men involved, including my husband, who gives us a lot of feedback on issues that we should be active on, but many other men as well. We're not changing our name. We're all part of the Brotherhood of Man for all these centuries. I think men can be part of Persisters, as I've been a part of the Brotherhood of Man. But just to say, we're open to anybody. All are welcome. That's one of our core values. All are welcome to defend democracy, to make our voices heard. One of the things that has really guided me personally as the person who's led Persisters is the quote from the great Gwen Ifill, who I miss very much. And she said, she seeks to bring light, not heat. And if Persisters can do that, bring light not heat, then I feel good about that. Now, we all have heat inside of us, especially this, and that's, I lashed out with heat. But we have determined as a group that we want to be informed. We don't want to just lash out. We take time to inform ourselves. People come to the group with their own strong interests, whether it's criminal justice reform or education, or when migrant children were being separated from their families, we take key issues based on the passions of the group. We seek to inform ourselves on those issues so that we can bring light to them. So each week when we gather, we have a list of actions that we act upon. And we decided early on that these actions wouldn't just be to oppose things, but also to support things. So every week we generally have an action sheet that has 3 issues that we support and 3 issues that we oppose. And we share that with all the members of the group, and we give them all of the tools they need to write or call those elected, the people who have power on those issues. And we have heard back from in our conversations, people say it's so important to us and to our soul to have things to support and not just to oppose. There's been so much to oppose for 4 years, but to call out the good, to raise up the good, to praise the good is a strong objective of ours. Some people might say, well, you're not affecting policy, but we're doing something for our souls, right? For our humanity. So those could be people that we thank and praise who have nothing to do. They might not be in elected office. We just raise them up because they've done a courageous thing. So of course, the past couple of months, we have raised up and sent a lot of thanks, including flowers this week, to Stacey Abrams. And it just fills our heart to do these sorts of things. So we're not just engaging with our elected officials. She's a powerful advocate for opposing voter suppression. She's a role model to many of us. So has been a powerful thing for us, is sending out those notes of thanks. And we also send, we've been very, I don't know the right word. We're active. Whenever there is a mass shooting, we try to find a way to send our condolences. And if it's a school, we send it to the school principals. If it's a city, we send it to the mayor. If it's a synagogue, we send it to the leaders of the synagogue. We try to name the people who were lost and ask them if they can forward on our messages of condolence. Again, it's a heart thing. And I have to say that's been one of the most heartbreaking and powerful things we have done. And we have received back letters from people who've lost a child. And, if we did nothing else in 4 years, that would be enough. So I say all that to say, yes, we're a citizen action group who's trying to flex our muscles, but there are many of those groups, right? There are a lot of those groups, and some of us are members of many of them. So why Persisters? Why us? There's many other groups we can get involved in. And I think the power with our group is we've become a community, not out of design, but out of, I would say, the grace of God and just goodwill of people, that we have become a community that cares about one another and lift each other up in times of struggle. But the primary purpose, of course, is to affect policy, to protect our democracy as citizens in a democracy, to raise our voice and to let our voices be heard. I've completely gone off my outline. I don't even know how I'm doing on time here. Connor will be elbowing me soon. But in our engagement with political leaders and elected officials, we are consistent and persistent, and we do it whether they respond to us or not. And that's been a hard one. If any of you have questions or insight at the end of our presentation, I'd be happy to hear it. For 4 years, we have written to Senator Johnson, and he never takes the time to reply. We call his office, we leave voicemails, we write letters, we never get a reply. I understand they're busy people, but there are hundreds of persisters. Nobody hears from the man. Now, that's not an elected representative in a democracy. I can understand that he can't answer every piece of mail that he gets, but this has been 4 years. I put that in contrast to Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, who we wrote weekly, called regularly. We always heard back from him. We almost always disagreed, but we did know that he heard us, or some staff member heard us. He was in Congress for a long time. I opposed him for a long time, but there was some respect for the role there. Now he's been replaced by Representative Scott Fitzgerald, and we are trying our darndest to reach out to him. And I fear that he will become in the mold of Senator Johnson, because he does not have to hear us because he's in a gerrymandered district. He doesn't need us, and he knows it. That's a big threat to elected representative democracy. So our big issue on the state level this year will be the pursuit of fair maps. Obviously, that's a national issue as well, but it's something we can address here in Wisconsin. So the engagement with our elected leaders has led to some positives. Those are 2 negatives, I would say. But we've become friends, and we've become neighbor. Well, we're neighbors and we're friends with many of our state representatives now. And to me personally, that ability to call up your state representative and have a conversation, it's powerful for me. Even though I've been involved and interested in politics for a long time, there are many members of our group who never before did that. They didn't know who their representative was. They didn't interact with them. Representative Robin Vining has come to our meetings many times. She listens, she comes and she asks, I want to hear from you. That's a powerful thing, not just for her, because that's her job, but also for all of us who are there listening. We get a new feeling for that's our role in a democracy. That's how we flex our muscle. We have to have relationships. We have to have relationships that work. So the fact that we have no relationship at the moment with Ron Johnson, it's as if we don't exist. And we'll try to have a relationship with Scott Fitzgerald. We'll see how that goes. I take the line from Micah, the organization, not the prophet, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. And so some people have said, well, cut them off, you never hear from them. Well, true, but we still are their constituents. So we will continue to raise our voices. So that's a little bit about how we engage and how we flex our muscle. We have, as I said earlier, sent more than 6,000 letters, sent thousands or made thousands of phone calls. We've raised thousands of dollars for candidates. We believe, and this doesn't sound very humble, but I'm going to say it anyway. We believe that persisters had a powerful role in flipping. The only seat that flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2018 was Representative Robin Vining. She won by less than 100 votes. This year, she won by 8%. We go to the mat for her. We wrote thousands of cards, personal cards to undecided voters. Because that worked so well, we said to the next candidate who was seeking to flip a seat this year was Sarah Rodriguez. So we sought out her campaign and said, this is how we thought we helped Robin Vining. Can we do it for Sarah? And we did the same thing again. We sent thousands of postcards to undecided voters on behalf of Sarah Rodriguez. That seat was one of 2 that flipped in 2020 from Republican to Democrat. We had previously been represented by Rob Hutton in Wauwatosa, who also didn't reply to us. Our state senator is Dale Kuyenga. He has blocked many of us from his email list. That's not representative democracy. He met with us once, and we were so grateful to have a sit-down meeting with him. But I have to back it up a step. The only reason we'd been asking for years, the only reason he finally met with us was one of our persisters contacted Jim Stingle at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and said, Jim, if you ever want to stop by on a Friday morning, come see what persisters do. And Jim Stingle did. This was about 2 years ago now. And he wrote just a beautiful article I had never met him before. What a wonderful guy. And in it, we expressed that we write to Senator Kuyenga. He never replies. We never hear from him. And it was after that article, which got a lot of attention, that then Dale Kuyenga called and said, oh, I'd like to meet with persisters. So we learned something from that.
We want to make sure we also give Connor time, but
oh my gosh,
maybe just 2 minutes of the key points, and questions are coming in.
He was supposed to elbow me and he didn't.
He's so kind. I know.
So persistence is key. That's my final message. We've grown to more than 600 people on Facebook. Please join us. We're on Zoom every Friday. Please join us. All are welcome. And I'm sorry for overrunning my time.
Loved it. Loved it. This was so relevant to what we're all asking. How do we defend our democracy? It was spot on. We're very grateful. So let's hear that beautiful Irish voice of Connor.
So thank you. So I work at Community Advocates downtown, started 40 years ago by Father, oh gosh, I've forgotten his name now. I actually never met him, Jerome. But originally he was a Capuchin whose ministry was to the homeless. He left the Capuchins and started Community Advocates about 40 years ago, which helps people with their basic needs, principally in the area of housing. And about 10 years ago, Community Advocates started a small additional department called the Public Policy Institute, because Community Advocates had been at that work for 40 years, and Milwaukee's a wealthy city, but it's a legitimate question to ask: if Milwaukee's a wealthy city, why are there so many poor people in Milwaukee? Because the need for our services every day of every week has not decreased. So David Reamer was the original leader of Community Advocates Public Policy Institute. I'm an economist by training, so I started working there with David, and we worked on a project of if we were to reduce we were to cut in half the number of people living in poverty in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, what would be the policies that we would pursue? And we got together some local, national, and state folks who have a lot of knowledge around poverty alleviation, and came up with a package of policies that we then went to the Urban Institute in Washington, DC, and they modeled those policies for us as to how much they would cost and what the effect would be. And if that policy package was followed, we would lift more than half of the people in Wisconsin out of poverty. And the policies are not complicated. They're essentially about creating access to work and rewarding work. But in that work that I did with David and Julie Kirksick, and also through my involvement with Micah, there's an intersectionality between economic marginalization and criminal justice involvement. And it's sad to me, I'm Irish, and growing up in Ireland, there's a powerful narrative in Ireland about the United States, that poor Irish people crossed the Great Atlantic to work hard, and they would send money back to Ireland to, in some cases, literally stop their families from starving. And so what brought Irish people across the Atlantic 100 years ago was very similar. As I was spending, getting to know Milwaukee better, was very similar to the same reasons that African Americans came up to Milwaukee in the 1950s and 60s and 70s to work in the big factories here. But in the 1980s, deindustrialization happened really from an economics perspective in a very short period of time. And the closure of A.O. Smith and Allis-Chalmers and other large factories really significantly adversely affected, particularly African Americans. And that there's Professor Mark Levine, who Lisa worked with for many years at EWM, has done a very good job in charting the decline in the economic fortunes of African Americans in Milwaukee. And so some statistics that are meaningful to me in the work that I do. In 1970, 85% of all prime working age African American men were working in Milwaukee. In 1970, 85% of African American men were working. By 2010, only 52% of African American men were working in Milwaukee. And as a community, they've never found their economic standing since deindustrialization. And people who are put into desperate circumstances, some of them do desperate things. And there's a lovely quote from Pope Paul VI in 1972. He said, "If you want peace, work for justice." And growing up in Ireland, I was very conscious of the violence in Northern Ireland growing up. And I've come to understand the wisdom of Pope Paul VI's words there. Generally, when there's violence in a community, there's an underlying injustice that's driving that violence. And if you deal only with the violence and don't go to the underlying injustice, you just contain a problem, you don't solve it or you don't heal it. And a big driver of the violence in our community is people being in desperate economic circumstances. And so together with Tom Heinen and Joe Alwinger and others, Julie Kirksick, about 10 years or so, we started working on Milwaukee Transitional Jobs Collaborative, advocating for subsidized employment programs to help people transition from the informal economy into the formal economy and give them a foothold in the world of work. And that's been successful within the limited resources that have been made available to the Transform Milwaukee Jobs program in Milwaukee. There's about 560 subsidized employment slots a year in Milwaukee. And it's made a difference. There's been an increase in the employment of African American men in Milwaukee in recent years, but it's not at the scale we need it to be. But so in my economics work, I've become more involved in reentry work and criminal justice reform. And there's an excellent book, Michelle Alexandra, The New Jim Crow, that just does an excellent job in showing the connectedness between slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. And I would say the things that we witnessed last Wednesday in the ransacking of the United States Capitol is also connected with those same roots. And it's known as white supremacy or white privilege. And it's part of the baked in culture of the United States. And we've never had a proper reckoning around it that I believe. So anyway, there's a significant number of people in prison in Wisconsin, and starting in the late 70s, there was this mass intentionality to incarcerate and imprison more people and build more and more prisons. And Tommy Thompson was very involved in that as the governor of Wisconsin at that stage. And in more recent years, Tommy Thompson has expressed regret for spearheading that, and would like to be engaged in activities now that help to decrease the number of people incarcerated. But in 1970, there was less than 3,000 people in our state prison system. By 2020, there was 23,000 people in our state prison system. And we spend $1.2 billion a year on our state prison system. And that's money that's not available for our children in schools. It's not available for fixing potholes in our streets. It's not available for providing services for old folks and homeless people. So now 2 or 3 years, well, 3 or 4 years ago, there was an assistant U.S. attorney, Bill Lipscomb. He works very closely with Judge Pat Garnes. She's a federal judge. He collected a number of us together to apply for a grant, a smart reentry grant. It's a federal grant that came out from the Second Chance Act, which was an important federal piece of legislation to reduce incarceration. And we in Community Advocates had a small part of that grant, and that small part was calling upon us to convene something called the Milwaukee Reentry Council. It's a subcommittee of the Community Justice Council, and it focuses specifically on reentry. And once a month, there's about 60 of us who get together, and we try to collaborate more effectively so that men and women coming home from incarceration get the support they need to be successful in their reentry. There's a lovely expression. When I first came to live in Milwaukee, we're members of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in Wauwatosa. And I encountered this expression in my early days there: to love is to serve, and to serve is to meet people's needs. And people coming home from prison are not so different from the rest of us. And they generally have 3 principal needs: healthcare, housing, and employment or income. And within the Community Justice Council, we've got a healthcare task force, and that's headed up by Julie Sevenik, who's the head of Progressive Community Health Center, and Lars Brown, who's head of reentry programs for the Department of Corrections. And they, with many others in that group, have started something called some transitions clinics. And they are clinics that specifically provide health services to men and women coming home from incarceration. And as part of those transitions clinics, there are community health workers. And those 4 community health workers who just got started in the last couple of months. Sure.
On chat.
Yeah.
Answer the chat.
Those 4 community health workers are people who are once themselves incarcerated. And they are enormously important for being this point of connection and trust and relationship in guiding and accompanying men and women coming home from prison to go and get the health services that they need to be healthy and to succeed. And we also have a reentry housing task force. And for some people, particularly people who are on the sex offense registry, housing is a huge problem. And we only compound our problems as a community if we set up more and more barriers to people being able to come home successfully, because they revert to previous behaviors, and that not only hurts them, but it hurts the rest. It hurts everybody, and it's foolish, and it wastes a ton of money. It costs about $35,000 a year to incarcerate somebody for a year in the state of Wisconsin. So our housing task force, we work to expand the number of private sector landlords who will rent to people coming home from incarceration, and encourage them and support them. So that's a work in progress. On the employment side, we had a very good program going that was spearheaded by John Thomas from the Department of Workforce Development. For about a year, it was a monthly reentry resource fair called Home to Stay. And once a month on the first Wednesday at 3rd and North at Community Warehouse, there were about 30 to 35 agencies and employers who gathered together and met with men and women coming home from incarceration and their families to offer support so that they could be successful. That had to be discontinued because of COVID, but we now have a website called MKE Home to Stay Online that is a central area that has information specifically for men and women in reentry so that they can connect with people and companies and agencies that will offer them employment, healthcare, housing, and also other reentry services. Another thing that I appreciate having Paul Geenan on the call with us here, and I appreciate the community of First Unitarian, is we have restorative practice circles called Circles of Support. So when men and women come home from prison, they've got challenges to accessing pro-social networks and also overcoming the social isolation that and stigma that's associated with their return to the community. And circles of support are an intentional effort to create some healthy community for those men and women so that they can be welcomed back to the community and be part of healthy relationships to encourage them, and also build bridges across the line of fear that exists between those who've been incarcerated and the wider community. And there's a lovely gift that comes to us. Pastor Mick Rochke from Reformation Lutheran Church used to have this great expression that we're all blessed and broken. And there's brokenness among the community that have not been incarcerated, but it's often hidden. But when we're in community with men and women who've been incarcerated, who cannot hide the brokenness that was in their life, and in many cases have found a healing through their relationship with the divine that has an urgency that those of us who've not been incarcerated don't have. There's a gift that comes from them to us, but it's a gift that isn't clear until we are in community together. And it allows space for us to acknowledge our own brokenness and also our own blessedness. And so I really appreciate First Unitarian's commitment to circles of support. And my hope is that more congregations over time in Milwaukee will host circles of support so that we overcome these divisions that weaken us and that are the antithesis of the beloved community. And those divisions are across the once incarcerated and the wider community, but also across race, and they're across socioeconomic lines of division. We can and should enrich each other from the sharing of our experiences with each other, but we've become separated into our own with like with like in the United States, and it's very unhealthy, and it's not the kingdom of God, and it's not the beloved community as John Lewis and Dr. King spoke about. And so those are some of the things that I'm involved with that I appreciate that I can get paid to do that work. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. And I'll raise a few of the questions in chat, but all my friends who can look at chat, first of all, Lisa has sent you her email. So that's in chat. And I'll just spell it out. HEULER1 @me.com. HEULER1 @me.com. And again, Connor is CONORW1 @me.com. And they are very responsive to your questions. And we've had some other questions too. And this one, I think, Bruce, can you show the whole community now? I know that we have 28 participants, and one question is going to require a show of hands. So let's take a look. Bruce, can you shift our view from presenter view or speaker view to the total view? Maybe I can do it. Okay, all right, I changed mine now to gallery view. And so, of course, Bruce, our agitator and advocate, wants to know what Lisa thinks, first of all, if there were other chapters. What do you think, Lisa, of creating Eastside Persisters or another, maybe something if people who don't wanna, oh, wait a minute, we're Zooming for a while. But anyway, let me back up. Once we get to meet in person, how many of you would be willing to be part of Persisters? Oh, a show of hands, please. Bruce, I think you can see that we are highly motivated and inspired. And I knew that Lisa would help us engage in action. So that's a possibility. And Lisa, we might need you and Connor to coach us if that were to happen. And so now if you want to ask a question, you are welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself. And then I'll let Connor and Lisa jump in as they want to answer. Okay, Paul Geenan.
Yeah, Pat, I'd like to bring everybody up to date on circles of support. And I want to thank Connor again for your support in getting this off the ground. We are meeting the fourth Wednesday of every month. And we're rotating people through. I have 2 slots. I have one open on January 27th. If you'd like to be part of that, just let me know. And I want to talk about what we do. We listen and we encourage. And not only do we talk, listen, do we listen from returning citizens, but we also supply support for our circle keeper, Sylvester Jackson and Amanda Stipp. And I can tell you quite honestly that the responses I've gotten from people who have participated in this has been incredibly warm, enthusiastic. So I ask you to consider being part of this. But I want to talk about what came out of it, because in our circles in November after the election, Sylvester Jackson said, "What can we do to leverage this wonderful success we had with this November 3rd election?" And so out of that grew an initiative to talk to Republicans, to talk about prison reform. And Lisa, we have a meeting with Senator Dale Coinga Friday at 9:30, and you're certainly welcome to join. I have to tell everyone that this is I'm going to try to be kind. It's a very difficult to get an appointment with a Republican senator if you're not from their district. And what's been working for us, this week we had a meeting with the chief of staff of Dale Strobel, who, if you don't know who that is, he's the one who's going to build our next prison. And that meeting went very, very well. And I want to compliment First Church, because the reason we're getting these meetings is because we're saying we're First Church, we're members of circles of support, we're interested in what's going on, and would you talk with us? So I'll leave it at that. Anyone who's interested in being part of this, just let me know.
Thank you. And if you want to add your email, Paul, to our chat, that'd be great. And I know that Tom and Katie have a question about current funding. And I know Terry Wiggins has a question about coal. So let's start with Tom or Katie. Okay, I see.
Hey, no, all right. Just a quick one for Connor. I wondered if you could, hi to both of you. If you could summarize current funding for transitional jobs and efforts, perpetual efforts to increase that funding in light of all that's happening with COVID and at the state legislature.
Thanks, Tom. So current funding is about $9.5 million a year for transitional jobs in 22 counties, and the Milwaukee Transitional Jobs Collaborative that Tom's been involved with for many years, and that's headed by Pastor Joe Ellwanger. We have a goal and an ask of the governor for $30 million a year for a statewide program. And transitional jobs are very, very effective in transitioning people from the informal or non-working, the informal economy or non-working, into the formal economy. And that's enormously important for us to do that, so that people are paying taxes and part of the fabric of civil society. I have a a long-term desire of the $1.2 billion a year that we spend on corrections. If just $50 million of that $1.2 billion was put into transitional jobs, I have no doubt that we'd significantly decrease the number of people going into our criminal justice system in a significant way. But $30 million is our current ask for a statewide program. Thanks, Tom.
And Terry?
Yeah, Connor, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your work with Cole and talk about what that is.
Certainly. So I appreciate being part of the Coalition on Lead Emergency that is centered down in Amani neighborhood in 53206 with many folks, a good number of whom are on this call, Anne and Katie and Terry, among others. And the Coalition on Lead Emergency has the goal to make Milwaukee a lead-free city. And there's a number of initiatives within that. One that I'm involved with is workforce development. And the idea there is to get people from the most marginalized communities in Milwaukee, who are often the ones who suffer most significantly from lead poisoning, to get them, create pathways for employment for those individuals to address the lead problems. And that would be getting them equipped in lead abatement work so that they could abate houses so there's no longer lead poisoning. Also get them trained and employed in doing replacing of lead laterals. There's 70,000 properties in Milwaukee that still have lead laterals, and those are sources of potential lead poisoning for the people who occupy those properties. And some other communities like Green Bay have replaced all of their lead laterals. We do 1,000 lead laterals a year. It'll take us 70 years at this pace. But an idea that we're working on the workforce development subcommittee is, let's get people trained up from the poorest parts of our community on how to replace these lead laterals, how to do lead abatement work, so that the children in our community are no longer getting poisoned. And the third area of employment that the Workforce Development Committee is working on is neighborhood educators that would go door to door and to different community centers to equip people with the knowledge about what is lead poisoning, how can you recognize it, what can you do about it, and what can be done to stop it. And so I appreciate working with Anne and Terry and Katie and Pastor Mary Martha and Dennis Jacobson and Richard Diaz and others on that work together.
Thank you. And I know Anne has a question. Anne Batista.
Hi, hi, Connor. Thank you so much for your presentation here. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to perhaps at some point, I'm not sure at what point we are in the discussions about this, but the League of Women Voters of the state is planning an infrastructure project with the American Society of Civil Engineers. And we're hoping that this will spark infrastructure projects down the line. And we'd like to make sure that people who are disadvantaged have an opportunity to take part in those jobs. So anyway, just a heads up, I'll be calling if that's okay with you. And that's true for everybody here who's interested in that there will be some public meetings coming down the line.
That's great. Mm-hmm.
Dennis, I see your hand is up, but you have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Connor, I've really thought a lot about the Midwest, upper Midwest, and where all the Trump voters came from. So many of them did. And it seemed like a fundamental problem. Milwaukee's a great example, is that we've lost a manufacturing base, and we literally brought a lot of African Americans up, I think in the 40s and 50s, to work in the factories here. So without those kind of jobs, you as an economist, do you see that there are enough jobs? Are they going to have to be subsidized or what to provide, I think, particularly like young African American men and women with the jobs? And then that will prevent the whole cycle of, joblessness, and then, going to prison and so on. So are there some broad things that you see we can do probably at the national level for replacing these manufacturing jobs that we lost?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that we're going to replace the manufacturing jobs, Dennis, but one thing that's interesting is the value of manufactured goods in real terms has not declined in the United States over the past 20 or 30 years, but the labor intensity that's required to manufacture goods now is significantly less than what it used to be in terms of number of people. So I'm not sure that we'll create new jobs in the same space as the old jobs we lost. However, human beings are endlessly creative. And there was a large crisis in employment in the early 1800s when there was when technology was getting used in agriculture and it was shedding an enormous amount of labor that was no longer needed in agriculture. Many of those people moved to cities and they found new ways to use the gifts that God has given them to to contribute towards the prosperity of the community. And I think that that's still possible. What those jobs will be, I'm not sure, Dennis, but our Creator is endlessly imaginative and creative. And when we are in right relationship with him or her, we become endlessly creative and imaginative. Everybody has gifts. So one thing that's interesting to me about transitional jobs is 2/3 of the people who go through transitional jobs find good, reasonably good, but certainly long-term unsubsidized employment. They've learned how to work, and that's the most important thing. And one thing I see in myself is it's sinful. I've seen in myself that in the past, and sometimes still in the present, it's sinful for me to look at another human being as a burden. Every human being, even some people who are coming back from prison who've done some very hard, bad things in their lives, they're not a burden. They are endowed with certain giftedness, and we as a community, in relationship with them, have failed to find where their giftedness can find purchase. So one thing that's in connection with rural communities and also the urban community is there's joblessness up in rural communities also. There's a need for transitional jobs up in rural communities. What the people will be doing, I don't have an answer to that. I am very encouraged that we've had an increase in Black male employment in Milwaukee over the past 5 or 6 years, as documented by Professor Mark Levine. And I think the transitional jobs are one factor that helped to contribute to that.
We have another question from our artist, and that is, are there ways that the arts are involved in these programs? For any of you, either.
We had a action that we did when Wauwatosa was under curfew, and there were protests in Wauwatosa. We decided that the messaging was incorrect and misinformed, and we wanted to put out a positive message. And we have some very gifted people and persisters around communications and messaging, and we created a sign that you may have seen if you've driven through Wauwatosa, which is TOSA Strong, Diversity, Equity, Justice. And we had some great people who were able to design that sign in 12 hours. We all approved it in our rapid response team. And then we had a local member of St. Matthews who has a printing business, printed it within that day. So within 18 hours, we covered the city of Wauwatosa with these signs. We asked everybody to put it on their Facebook page, and we wanted to put out a positive message. And the person who designed it for us, the graphic artist, said that that was the most hits she ever got to any design she did. There's a hunger for good art and a clear message. People want to spread that. And I still drive around Wauwatosa, and in the village, almost every business has that sign in the window. They don't think of it as being from persisters. They think of it as just a message that they want to be attached to. It was very simple, and it was a quick turnaround. And that's the first time oh, I'm sorry, we have one other thing that we've used the arts. We created a logo. And our logo, if you follow us on Facebook, you'll see it. If you send me an email, I'll send it to you. I can't pull it up here quickly, but it's a beautiful logo, and that has really helped us. We put it on t-shirts. We wear it whenever we go to protests. And so people have come up to me and said, oh, are you a persister? So yes, arts help to centralize a message and make us recognizable. And those two things we feel very, we feel like they helped our movement a lot.
Yeah, I'd speak just briefly about the art of food. So one challenge that we have is most jobs are created by small and medium-sized enterprises, not big companies. And most of those jobs are filled by word of mouth. Somebody's nephew or uncle knows somebody who says, I think that would be a good candidate for this job. So one area that that I appreciate is Amaranth Cafe on about 32nd in Lisbon. Quite a few years ago, they participated in the Transitional Jobs Program, and they employed a young local man, African-American man, to start washing dishes in their kitchen. And he doesn't work very many hours, I think 15 to 20 hours a week. But that relationship transcended the 6 months of the transitional job. He's continued to work there. And the human relationship that he has with the folks who run Amaranth Cafe has been life-giving, I would say, to both of them. And so I appreciate Julie Kirksick and David Reamer were very involved in the creation of the original Transitional Jobs Program, born out of their experience with something called the New Hope Project. And the way transitional jobs are set up in Wisconsin are very well done. There's a host site employer where the person goes to do the work, but they are not the employer of record. UMass is the employer of record in Milwaukee, and they look after payroll, taxes, insurance, all of those things. And the host site employer likes the lack of red tape in hosting these individuals to work there. So that's a strength. And some of the people over the years have worked in a transitional job in the arts space, and that's been helpful.
I want to promote next week. Ann Batista, will you unmute yourself? She's also put a message to everyone in the chat.
Hi, thank you. Yes, next week, I'm very excited. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Meltzer, will join us along with Ray McGovern, who was the presidential daily briefer for George H.W. Bush and is a longtime peace activist since his 27 years in the CIA as a Russia analyst. I don't know if any of you saw the editorial in the New York Times yesterday. Neil Sheehan's quote was very powerful about the impact of the Pentagon Papers from Daniel Ellsberg. And I think next week we can discuss that. I'll also be sending out information to people. I've been trying to do that. And we'll share some through the Social Justice Forum here, and also with anyone who, if you want to send me your email, I'll add you to my list. But hope you can join us. It should be quite interesting, and it's actually been promoted nationwide, so it should be interesting.
Thank you, Ann. Connor, Lisa, Williams, thank you, thank you, thank you. Endless gratitude. And friends, you can unmute yourselves now and send out a call of appreciation or gratitude, or a word or two that you learned.
Thank you. I was very impressed. Thank you.
Many thanks for all that you do. Much appreciated.
Just following in your footsteps, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for giving us the opportunity.
I just want to say thank you for having us today. I appreciate seeing all of you and your questions. It was an honor. I also want to just shout out, my mom is on this call. She doesn't normally join anything on Zoom, and I wouldn't love or fight for my country as much if it hadn't been the lessons taught to me by my mom and dad. And my sister is also on the call, and she is my persister. I couldn't do it without her. So I just want to say thank you to Cheryl and to Pat Hoyler.
I just want to, this is Lorraine, I just want to thank you very much. And you struggled through all the process of getting to be here today, and I really appreciate your patience with us. Just a reminder that First Church has a channel for YouTube, and our forums are on there. We have our own space, or whatever it's called, on YouTube. So if I could type in the link to the UU channel, it's uumilwaukee.org, and you can find us on the YouTube channel, and they'll be there for posterity, and you can send people to watch your speech, and we can learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.